So you've tracked your footage and you think you've successfully solved your camera, but you're still not finished yet. There's one more step. We need to define our reconstruction. To show you what I mean, let's go into 4-up view here, and you'll see a bunch of points that exist in 3D space. But if I dolly out here in the top view, you can see my camera and everything else is way kind of all over the place. Now, I need to better define exactly where we are in this 3D world so that it better fits within our 3D world. So let's go ahead and jump back into the perspective view. And there are 2 different tags we're going to use to figure out exactly where everything is set up. So the first thing you should do is select your motion tracker. And then with the motion tracker selected, go ahead and right-click and go to the motion tracker tags area. There are 2 different tags we're going to set up. The first tag is the planar constraint tag. This is going to allow us to define our ground plane. Go ahead and choose that, and you'll see a triangle that appears in the window. Now, I want you to hold down Shift and then click on your solved camera in the Objects Manager. The second you do that, all the points in your scene will become active. So you need to select at least 3 points to get an accurate ground plane. That's why we have a triangle. I'm going to start with these points down here because they're relatively straight. And as I click through, I can select more points to flatten out my plane. Now, I know this looks kind of poor because the plane hasn't really lined up with my track yet. But what we've been doing is loading up points into my tag. So I'm just going to let go of Shift for a second and click on my tag. And if we go to our Attributes tab here, you can see I have a whole bunch of points that are automatically loaded in based on my selection. Now, occasionally when I click through and I'm still not getting a perfectly set up ground plane, it's because I've loaded up some of these red points. If I hold down Shift and click on this red point here, see, it's loaded into my selection area. So that's usually an easy way to refine things. Just click on one of those points and press Delete. Now, should you decide you want to deselect a point here in the viewer, you can hold down Control and click on a point to deselect that point. Now this is starting to look a little bit more like a ground plane. And it's hard to tell which points you've actually selected, but if you look really closely, you can see they have a larger square in the middle. So I'm just selecting and deselecting points, holding down Control or Shift until I get something that I think looks really tight on the ground plane. Thankfully, our footage has a bunch of parallel tracks. So what I'm looking at is this line here, and I'm trying to get this line to actually line up with each one of the boards. Now this looks pretty darn close, but I'm just going to try 1 or 2 more points to see if I can flatten this out just a little bit more. The more points you have, the more flat your ground plane should be. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good, so we'll leave it set at this. Now, in order to actually set this up, I have a mode and it said Features Define the Plane. So we've gone through and selected the features, and if we go down to the bottom, we have a button here called Create Plane. When we do that, it's automatically going to place a plane into my scene. Now, we need to go back up to the motion tracker and specify where the origin of our project is. So I'm going to select my motion tracker one more time, hold down Shift and click on my solved camera, and I'll right-click and go to Motion Tracker Tags, and this time we'll use a position constraint. Now, I accidentally added an additional one to my solved camera, so I'll deselect those and just select that one and delete it. Okay, so let's go through the process again. I'm going to select my position camera, click on my motion tracker, hold down Shift and click on my solved camera, and now I can actually specify a point in my scene. Now, since I can't see through where my plane is, I'm going to just deactivate my plane, and now I can just click here on one of these points. I think that's as good a point as any. As long as you have your motion tracker selected and your tag selected, when you go to your tag, notice it'll automatically load in your marker. So this looks pretty good. Now, all we need to do is just test our track. So to do that, I'll turn the ground plane back on, and I'm going to add a cube into my scene. Notice the cube has already popped up in the origin, which is great. I defined that with my position tag. Now I'll change my cube settings down a little bit to say 50 by 50 by 50. Now it's sitting in the middle of the tracks, and we can go ahead, go back to the beginning of our timeline and press play, and it'll take a second to load up the frames. So once it actually loads up the frames, then we can go back and scrub through the scene. Don't be surprised if you see some of the elements disappearing. Just stop playback for a second and everything will reappear. Then you can just scrub the scene and you can see that the object has been added into the scene and we've successfully tracked it along with my shaky camera footage. So that's the process for defining your reconstruction. You want to set up a ground plane so you have good perspective for your X, Y, and Z axes, but you also want to specify the origin using your position marker. And then that way, whenever you add new elements in, you know they're going to the right place.